Israel is pressing ahead with its attacks against Hezbollah as its airstrikes against Lebanon's capital Beirut continue into another night. Lebanese media reported at least 4 massive attacks shortly after calls by Israel's army for residents to evacuate the area. The Israeli army says it targeted facilities that store weapons.
A mosque in Yarun, a village in the south of Lebanon. Destroyed by the Israeli military amid a series of intensified attacks in the region. This comes after a weekend of heavy bombardments of Beirut's southern suburbs. The Israeli military says it targeted weapons storage facilities and infrastructure belonging to Hezbollah. The attacks were the most intense since the start of Israel's assault on Beirut. And they left behind a wave of destruction. Local residents questioned Israel's motives for the bombardment. Do you see any weapons here? Do you see weapons? Israel also intensified its airstrikes on eastern Lebanon, like here in the city of Baalbek. On Sunday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited a military base on the Lebanon border. He held a security assessment with his country's commanders and spoke to troops. A year ago, we suffered a terrible blow. In the past 12 months, we are changing the reality completely. The whole world is astonished by the blows that you inflict on our enemies, and I salute you and say to you, you are the generation of victory. Filippo Grandi, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, met with Lebanese Prime Minister Najib Mikati in Beirut to discuss the worsening humanitarian crisis in the country. He warned that civilians were caught in the crossfire.
We need respect for civilian infrastructure and civilian population. Unfortunately, many instances of violations of international humanitarian law in the way the airstrikes are conducted that have destroyed or damaged civilian infrastructure.
With plumes of smoke often billowing from the southern suburbs, the people of Beirut are hoping efforts to reach a ceasefire will soon succeed.
Now, several waves of rocket and drone attacks from Lebanon sent alarms blaring and caused damage to parts of the northern Israeli city of Haifa. The Iran-backed Hezbollah group said it was responsible for the salvos, claiming they had targeted 2 military bases south of the city. Footage showed some damage to nearby buildings and vehicles at the scene of one blast. Behnam Ben Taleblu is a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, focusing on Iran and its proxies. Welcome to DW, Behnam. We have just seen that Hezbollah is still capable of firing rockets at Israel. How strong is Hezbollah still?
Pleasure to be with you. That really is a key question right now as Israel continues to move north, both by air power and ground power, trying to either flesh out the high and mid-level operatives in what's left of Lebanese Hezbollah's command and control networks, as well as go after precisely what you mentioned, which is that inventory or that arsenal of various long-range strike capabilities, which includes on the lower end, mortars, on the slightly higher end, anti-tank weapons, on the even higher end, drones, and just above that, rockets, and finally above that, ballistic missiles, of which one was fired a few weeks back amid the Israel-Hezbollah exchanges. There are public reports that say, based on Israeli sources, somewhere near 40 to 60%, that's a very, very rough estimate, of Hezbollah's arsenal of 200,000 plus projectiles has been detected and expended by the Israelis. I cannot personally verify the legitimacy or the veracity of that claim, but this claim is currently cascading in Western media right now, that number.
Right. How long do you think Israel will continue these attacks on Hezbollah before it feels it has achieved enough?
Well, the real question is where for the North is the crossroads of military victory and political victory. And as Israel has experienced more conventional battlefield success against an asymmetric adversary, there is a debate as to the goalpost that may be changing. The primary domestic goalpost within Israel, if the domestic goalpost with the war in the south was obviously defang or defeat Hamas and bring the hostages home, and to prevent what's left of that group or really any kind of resistance in Gaza from reorganizing and firing back like we did on October 7th against Israel. With the north, the priority number one has been to find a way to stop the conflict that is provides a safe enough window for the 60 to 80,000 internally displaced persons to go back to the 40 plus ghost towns in Israel's north, as well as to be able to kind of defang Hezbollah, become something of an enforcer of UN Resolution 1701. So until Israel really sees a change in Hezbollah's posture in the south, not just in the Dahia, but even further as you get closer to the Awali River, I don't believe any of the operations will be changing anytime soon. And what will delay them actually from accomplishing success there is the seemingly hot war that's operating in the background vis-a-vis the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is Hezbollah's proxy.
Let's talk about Iran.
Hezbollah's patron, forgive me.
Let's talk more about Iran. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that his country will retaliate for the Iranian missile attacks last Tuesday. Why hasn't this happened yet?
I still believe it's more a matter of when rather than if Israel responds kinetically and overtly against the Islamic Republic. After all, it did take, I think, anywhere from 5 to 6 days between the last Iranian projectile barrage back in April until when Israel responded, which was on April 19th. During that response, the Israelis showed they could do much more damage with much less ordinances, but much more advanced ordinances. I think that the likely drivers of a delay here are political interaction with the U.S., trying to define a target package that doesn't run afoul of the red lines the U.S. has set in the region, but perhaps more importantly, trying to make sure that the strike either defangs or deters the Islamic Republic. But there also is a million-dollar question to ask here, meaning, is this going to be a mere military operation, or is this part of a larger campaign? And that's an important question to ask as we're on the eve of the October 7th terrorist attack, a terrorist attack which has moved Israel from its previous posture of managing many of these theaters of conflict where the Islamic Republic has proxies to trying to solve them, and how that change in philosophy may impact the Israel-Iran shadow war, which is now out into the open. I'm not quite sure yet.
Last month, you wrote a column where you said, if anybody has learned how to take the win in the Middle East since October 7, it has been Iran. What did you mean by that?
You and the viewers may remember that back in the April exchange between Iran firing missiles and Israel responding kinetically, reportedly President Biden had beseeched Prime Minister Netanyahu to take the win, to seize the opportunity and not respond and kind of rally around the flag, noting the success of the ability to deny the Islamic Republic from landing a blow. But the way Tehran has been continuing this fight with, changing these theaters of conflict, changing the volume of projectiles and staying in the fight, is that it's achieving political wins. What I meant by that is one of the biggest things, unfortunately, the Islamic Republic has going for it is that it is able to successfully play on America's fears of a wider war in the region, particularly as we come up to the one-year anniversary of the October 7 terrorist attacks. And in that sense, try to use American fears of a wider war to pump the brakes on the success of Israel's military operation. So inadvertently here, Iran is indeed taking the win by preying on fears of an American wider war and fleshing out America's desire for restraint and de-escalation over deterrence.
I just want to get deeper into that comment about the U.S. because you also wrote that Iran is benefiting from a contradiction at the heart of how the Biden administration in the U.S. sees the Middle East. Help us understand that.
That is precisely the contradiction that even a year later we still see in U.S. policy, and that's the talking about or the signaling of a desire for deterrence in the region, but in terms of the practicality of the U.S. force posture in the region, as well as the things that it is doing, it's signaling a desire for de-escalation. And de-escalation and deterrence are two fundamentally contradictory philosophical and practical moves. If you're trying to restore deterrence or bolster deterrence, you necessarily have to take risks, and some of those risks are indeed escalatory. Vis-a-vis, if you are doing de-escalation, you're trying to freeze a conflict, you're trying to build trust, you're trying to walk things back, and indeed in a potentially dangerous cycle where there's much mistrust and ongoing shooting, de-escalation can actually erode your deterrence. So this contradiction that exists at the heart of U.S. policy, in my view, is driven by a war between U.S. strategy and politics that is not yet adjudicated and will not be adjudicated even as we get closer to the November 5th presidential election here.
You've already mentioned this, as today is the first anniversary of the Hamas terror attack on Israel and the start of the war in Gaza. I would like to take a step back and ask you how you think the region has changed since then.
Oh, goodness, it's changed drastically. Even as we came up to the terrorist attack on October 7th, no one actually knew that it was coming. But as you came up to it, the talk was, the trend lines in the region were that the pro-status quo states were getting together more. There was all this talk of potential Saudi-Israeli normalization. There was this outside-in approach that was started by the Trump administration, continued by the Biden administration, somewhat belatedly, to bring these status quo and pro-American forces in the region much more together. The problem is, ever since October 7th, the multi-front war Israel has faced has been really devastating to that to bring this status quo coalition together. And instead, you've seen a massive divide between some Arab states and the Arab street. You've seen Iran try to use military force, both indirectly via proxies and directly twice now against Israel, to be able to take the focus off of it and to put the focus back on the Palestinian issue, admittedly by using and abusing that cause. And indeed, you've seen actually the U.S. Adrift because of that contradiction between deterrence and de-escalation, and adrift at either trying to foist the peace and adrift at either trying to restore deterrence. And as we get indeed closer to the U.S. election, you're likely to see all of these trend lines kind of continue and limp along.
That's Behnam Ben Taleblu with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you so much for that context.
Thank you.